Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from the spring break. I hope you guys had fun. So remember, we had an exam. Let's take a look at it. This is the results. And they are very good, of course, because like I said, the exam was super easy. As long as you kept track of everything, it was not a difficult grade. 10 people got 100% on that. Before even any extra credit, I gave some extra credit, and I will give some extra credit to go on, but that was not a hard exam. And even an average was 94%. So that's probably as good as it gets. Remember though that we will have one more online exam, but the final will be, again, in person on Scantrons. So make sure you actually keep track and be prepared, because that's the easiest way to ruin your grade, is to do very badly on the final. Final still going to, it will be cumulative. It will have some questions from the first 3 reviews and some new questions from the end of the class. So obviously I can't give everyone an A. That would be not fair, because some students do better than others, right? Some students pay more attention than others. So in order for you to keep a good grade, it's not very difficult, but you still need to do an effort. And also I'll be taking attendance periodically, and that will also factor in, right? Because that's the biggest part of this class. When you're here and you're participating and we're discussing all these interesting topics, that tells me that, of course, you deserve a better grade. But if you're not even here, maybe you are taking those exams and maybe you're even doing well, but that's not the most important part of the exam, of the class. So for me, that would be, of course, a huge red flag. And yeah, so make sure you are attending, make sure you are participating, keep track of the questions, and then it will not be too hard to get an A. Right, now let's reflect on some of the stuff, because we're actually getting into probably most interesting part of philosophy, the more modern philosophers, and whatever we talked about before is related to what we'll be talking about going into the future. It gets a little more complicated, but it builds on the previous philosophers, on their ideas. So remember, last time before we went into the break, we talked about Locke. So one of the things we mentioned with Locke and Newton is God of the gaps. What was the God of the gaps? Well, not necessarily God created, but like science cannot explain it, right? We don't know who created it. It's just that science doesn't have any answers, and scientists, including Newton, were using God to fill those gaps. They were saying, okay, in particular Newton said, I don't know why, given gravity, all the planets and stars do not just collapse into one huge chunk. And he used God. He said, maybe God is keeping them away. But there's a danger in that. What's the danger? If you start using God like this, but then science moves on, right? And science gives you answers to these questions. That leaves less and less room for God. And in fact, this is important also, especially for today, when we talk about Berkeley. This was what was happening. People were moving away from religion. They were moving away from God. Why? Because science explained more and more things. Back in the day, like medieval times, people didn't know anything. Science was pretty much non-existent, so they could explain everything with God. They would say, well, rain comes, that means God is like sending water. Lightning strikes, God must be mad, he's throwing some lightning bolt, and so on. Great. Then, if you want to avoid these bad things, what do? You pray to God and go to the priest and probably give the priest some money so that he could have a good word for you with God. So if you're a peasant and you want a good crops, that's the way to go, right? But once science starts explaining this one by one, there seems to be less and less room for God. people more and more starting to think, okay, we thought all this stuff was God, but turns out it's not God. Now this stuff, we still don't know what it is, but what are the chances this is God? Seems like it's just a matter of time before science will tell us that it's not God either. Remember that another thing we talked about, deism, that was emerging, this idea that God actually started the whole thing, because most people still believed in God, but they thought, okay, God created the world like a clock, and he wound it up, and it's going now, and God no longer touches the world. But it also is a little weird, isn't it? Then you start thinking like, okay, so what's the role of this God? He's just watching, like sitting there doing nothing, watching us? May as well not be there, because what's the point praying to God if the world works on this clockwork mechanism? Then another thing Locke was talking about is the innate ideas. Remember, you got this very Newtonian approach. So just to remind you, the ideas are entering our mind. Our mind is like an empty box. There's nothing there when we are born. He had arguments against innate ideas. But then once we are born, the ideas are starting to flood in and accumulate inside our mind. What arguments did he use to reject the concept that there are innate ideas already there when we are born? You remember? That was on the exam too. Yeah.
Because do you believe that we experience things through experience, and everything we know is through experience that we have?
Yeah, but he had more specific arguments. He said, like, look at children, look at insane people, right? What ideas do they have? They don't have any ideas. And then they get them later. So that was his argument. He wasn't just saying that it seems to me like we don't have any ideas. He was saying we have examples of children who don't have these ideas, of insane people who don't have them. What did we call representative realism? That's Locke's approach, right? Representative realism. Do you remember what it means? Representative realism. Yeah.
The view that certain concepts refer to real things, so sensory ideas represent material objects.
Yeah, so it's realism. This is important because now we're going to talk about it with Berkeley, and then with Hume, and then with Kant. How do we know there are objects at all? Well, suppose this is your mind, or any mind for that matter. Suppose this is an object, I don't know, whatever it is, cube. Standing somewhere. How do you know there's cube? So representative realism says it's real. The cube is there. That's why it's realism. He's not disputing that, but he's saying, well, we don't have direct access to cube. We only have an idea of a cube, which we perceive through our senses, vision, touch, smell maybe if it stinks or something, I don't know. Depends on the cube, right? And they represent this cube. So the tiny little idea of a cube in our head represents the real cube. This cube is real. And we know this idea is also real. Why? I don't know, we just presume it. That's kind of his answer. Why can't we know it for sure? Well, the only way to know it for sure if you're not using your mind, right, and somehow directly perceive the cube. But what does it even mean? How can you not use your mind? What are you using then? Your food? Right? That doesn't make any sense. So Locke is not worried about it. He says, well, it's common sense. It seems to me like there are objects, and I'm not questioning that, even though I don't have direct access. Okay. According to Locke, what are the primary and secondary qualities? Remember the primary and secondary qualities. They were distinguishing. Yeah.
Primary qualities like size, shape, and motion. Secondary qualities like color, taste, and sound.
Exactly. So if we have a cube, the shape of this cube is primary, but the color of this cube, let's say the cube is red, that's secondary. Why did they think that there are primary and secondary? People can disagree about the color, right? I can think it's red, and you can tell me, no, it's actually kind of pink. And somebody else can disagree even more. It's even more obvious with taste. I can say it's salty, and you can say, no, it's actually perfectly fine. So they thought, since people disagree, that's not something real, it's just our perception, so this is not a real quality. But the shape, we don't disagree about that, at least not unless you are completely mad or something, right? We would all agree, if there's a cube, everyone in this room will agree it's a cube and not a ball. And if somebody says it's a ball, they're probably joking. So that's why they thought this is primary, the shape, the size, how big it is, you can measure it. Plus, all this stuff is also you're capable to converting it to numbers. Like you can say it's 3 by 3 feet. And again, I can measure it and I will discover it's 3 by 3. You can measure it, you can measure it. We will all agree it's 3 by 3. But color, they didn't think color can be described with numbers or a sound. Now today we know it can, right? It actually is something which we have in computers. They give us colors based on numbers. It's always a stream of numbers. But back then they couldn't figure out how can you describe red with numbers. To them it seemed like it doesn't make any sense, or a sound. So that's why they thought that this is primary qualities and secondary qualities. Primary qualities are real qualities of objects, independent of the mind. Secondary qualities, now that's what mind kind of adds on when you perceive it. Your mind perceives it as being red, but also in the different light you can perceive it as being blue, and then maybe depending on some other circumstances it can appear black or green or who knows what. And finally, what is a substance according to Locke? Remember, the substance, the idea goes back to Aristotle. But once we got to Locke, Locke was actually thinking about it more in the way we think today. What was he thinking substances? Yeah.
Didn't he say that it was something that he knows, but knows not of what?
No, yeah, that's more precisely. But the first part, he knows. So what does he mean by this? We know and we don't know. That's his kind of point. How do we know? Well, when we touch stuff, there's something there. There's something there. So clearly there's some substance. So this is this stuff inside everything. That's the substance. But at the same time, what it is, he's saying, to be honest, I don't know. I don't know exactly what it is. I just know it's there. And he said the same thing about spiritual substance. Because remember, Descartes distinguished the spiritual and the material substance. And Locke agrees. He says, yeah, there are spiritual substances too. And again, I don't know what it is, but it seems common sense to me that I have a mind, and it's not the same thing as a table, so that has to be there too. Okay, so now we are in good shape to start talking about Berkeley. Because Berkeley reacts immediately to Locke. Who was George Berkeley? Interesting person. First of all, I don't know if any of you guys hear about Ireland, cute little island next to Great Britain. There's some students who may have Irish heritage because there were a lot of Irish immigrants in this country. Why? Because the life in Ireland was very, very bad for a very long time. It was pretty much a colony of Great Britain. They treated it very badly. There was a huge hunger there in the 19th century. 19th century, lots of Irish people came here. The population of Ireland instead itself dropped. Berkeley was Irish philosopher, and in fact he is the most prominent Irish philosopher out of all of them. Ireland is kind of proud of him, but he also played an important role here, because have you heard the name Berkeley? Where did you hear it?
The college.
Exactly. In California. And it's called because of him, because of George Berkeley. Who was George Berkeley? So he was born March 12, 1685. Right? So if you think about it, 1685, you may not remember the date, but in 1690, Locke published his essay. So that, all these ideas, Berkeley was 5 years old. A few years later, Berkeley went into Trinity College Dublin, and started studying that stuff. Locke actually did have a lot of attention because his ideas seemed to make sense, and they were studying it at universities at the time, and basically they were like within the curriculum. He, at age 15, he entered Trinity College Dublin. They were doing it much younger than we do today, so 15 years old, he already was done with his schooling. He entered university. Well, it's not university really, Trinity College. It's kind of like university because universities in Britain and in Ireland contain several colleges. But the thing with the Dublin one, it only had one college because it wasn't very big. So that's why Trinity College is like a university, but with one college. Oxford University has like 29 colleges, and like some other universities have different number of colleges. So colleges in Britain are just part of the university. They are not separate institutions. So he entered Trinity College Dublin, and then he studied Descartes, Malebranche, who we didn't talk about, and Locke. So he knew very well Descartes' ideas, which we covered a little bit earlier. He knew very well Locke's ideas, and that other person, Malebranche, also. They all kind of had an effect on him, and Newton's science. Newton's science was everywhere already by this time. But in 1710, he was ordained as a priest in Anglican Church. So he actually is a religious person, he is a priest. He's not just a philosopher, he's a priest, he believes in God. That explains a lot about what was actually his philosophy and why did he think it was necessary to go in this direction. He traveled quite a bit. His travels convinced him that the culture of Europe was in a state of decay, and he actually thought that the new spirit was in America. He was very fond of America, which at the time was British colony. Right? It didn't yet get independence. It was British colony, but it was already booming. A lot of people were moving here for new life because there was tons of land. Unlike in Europe, where the land belonged to rich people and poor people couldn't get. If you came here, which was of course quite a difficult journey, but if you made this journey at the time in America, you could get all the land you wanted. Of course, they were taking it from the Indian population, but that's just this dirty part of it. Nonetheless, they were taking a lot of it, and at the time the Indian population wasn't as concerned with it either, because America is pretty big, and there weren't that many of them. So huge chunks of land were available. You come, take as much land as you want. If you want to work on this land, be my guest. They were growing tobacco at the time, they were growing some other stuff, and they were actually making money, making decent living. Unlike in the old world, where, like I said, it's already all divided. There are lords, there are poor people, and poor people couldn't stand the chance of becoming a lord. But here, everything is open, and he really loved this idea. So he had a vision of founding a college here. He thought that for indigenous population and for all these people who immigrate here, they need education. So he actually advertised this idea to the government, British government at the time, and government actually thought it was a good idea. So they agreed with him, and they sent him here to America to found this college. But after he came here with his wife, a few years later, it turned out that there's no money for it. Like, the idea is great, no money. So he came here, he spent a few years in America, money never came from the Great Britain. I guess they thought, why waste money on all those people who left anyway, let's just spend it here for our own lords, that's more useful. Anyway, but he tried, he did his best, and he even gave his personal library to Yale College. And later on, the Berkeley in California wasn't in existence at the time, but later when they decided to found this college, when Berkeley himself was already dead, they thought he was such an important figure for American education that they gave it his name. So that's why we have the UC Berkeley. Now, in 1734, he became Bishop of Cloyne, and finally in 1753, so when he was 68 years old, he died. He died in Oxford. The reason actually he happened to be in Oxford, his son was a student there, and he came there because of his son, and he died. So he's buried in Oxford. That's just his life story. What about his philosophy? His philosophy is quite interesting. One of the most important books he published in 1710 was a treatise concerning the principles of human knowledge. Similar name to Locke, similar name to what Descartes was doing, because they were all trying to understand the human knowledge, how do we know things. But his ideas were very different. In fact, one of the reasons he was doing it, what we already mentioned, he realized people believe in God less and less. Right? The science seems to be taking place of God. Science is pushing God away. And him being a priest, obviously he didn't think it was good. He thought that this is very problematic. And so his philosophy is an attempt to counter this. He got no quarrel with genuine science. He never said science is nonsense or whatever. He actually loved science. He knew quite a lot about it, but he thought it can be combined with belief in God, as long as you really understand what is happening there. As long as you don't try to go into metaphysics and explain things which you don't understand with science. Because when you start thinking about it, you will see that's actually not that simple. One thing is critique of abstract ideas. Remember, Locke was already criticizing the abstract ideas. But according to Locke, we can take experience of many particular dogs and abstract this form of dogness from them, and that will already be something we understand very well. Right? So when, according to Locke, when we say a dog, we don't have any particular dog in mind. It's neither big nor small. It's neither, has a huge tail or small tail, but it's like abstract idea. So if I tell you dog, you have an idea what I'm talking about, but you don't have any particular dog in mind. So that's what abstract ideas are. Now, Berkeley disagreed with that. He said, actually, I challenge you. He said, I challenge you. Try to imagine a dog which is neither big nor small, neither has a big tail nor small tail, neither has black fur or white fur. Can you do it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can imagine this dog. So what does it look like?
It's a mid-sized dog with a small tail.
Okay, so it's mid-sized, but it has a particular size, right? So that what he means is you would still have to imagine a particular dog. You can't have an idea of a dog which has no size, no color, no particular breed. That's an empty idea. So that's what he disagrees with. He says, no. There's no such thing. When we think about the idea of a dog, we have a particular dog in mind. And that's what the dog to us is. It's not an empty abstract idea. There is no such thing. Okay, next, let's do this little experiment. Let's talk about the apple. Can you describe an apple? What is an apple? Fruit. Round. It has to be round, right? I've never seen square apples. I guess theoretically with genetics now they can make square apple, but I would think it is round. Okay, so it is round. What else?
Sometimes red, sometimes green.
Okay, it could be red or green. I don't think it could be black, not unless it was like very old and already rotten. Anything else?
A stem.
Huh?
A stem.
stem coming out. Now if you start eating it, what's going to happen most likely?
It's like horrorless. We got seeds and
So it will get crunchy, right? That's probably the first thing, and maybe sweet or sour. Okay. Now what about its matter? Like when we describe an apple, do we ever talk about the matter of an apple? No, because we never perceive a matter of an apple, do we? In fact, what we have is sensations. Everything we just described. Sensation for brownness. Where do you get it? Your eyes, right? Your vision. Same with color. Same. This is the first thing we were describing. But then you have some additional stuff. Like for example, when you start eating it, you have sensation of taste. That adds to that. Is there anything other than what you perceive through your senses? No, right? I mean, what else can there be? So when we talk about matter, when we say apple has matter, what exactly are we talking about? Nothing. There is no such thing. I mean, we never experience matter. We experience roundness, redness, sweetness, and so on. So that's kind of his point. Apple to us is a bundle of sensations. All these sensations of colors, tastes, certain feel when we grab this apple, that's what apple is. It's a collection of ideas in our mind, right? That's the part. Like if you have an apple here in addition to our cube, that would be roundness, redness, crunchiness, and so on. Great. No substance and no matter of any kind is to be found there. So why are we making it up? You're saying it's common sense to say there's no such thing. It's actually not common sense to say that there is substance, because when we say that, we're making things up. We're talking about something we never experienced. Matter is not something we can ever experience in real life. So the argument he presented looks like this. Sensible objects, including houses, mountains, and so on, are things present in our sense experience. We experience them, and by the way, he's not rationalist. Remember, rationalist, empiricist, he's an empiricist. He's going with our experience. He's saying, that is true. We experience them through our senses. What is represented to us in sense experience consists solely of our ideas. It's in our mind. Because ideas are in our mind. This is not an idea. This is, well, something we actually make up based on the ideas we have. What we have in our mind, the representation, that is the reality. When we say that there's some real object somewhere out there, we're making it up. We have no reason to do that if you're being consistent. Sensible objects exist solely in our minds. And he's saying this is common sense. This is actually common sense. So he called himself an immaterialist. Immaterialist. Why immaterialist? Because he denied matter. He says matter does not exist. We are making it up. There is no matter. What is matter? It's nothing. All those qualities. So if you strip away the qualities of an apple, such as shape, color, odor, taste, texture, what we perceive through senses, there's nothing left. There's literally nothing left. Our apple experiences are not caused by a real apple. It's not like there is this real apple out there and then we perceive it in a certain way. They are real apple. Okay. So that is what we also call in philosophy idealism. Idealism is the claim that only two kinds of things exist in reality: minds or spirits, and ideas they perceive. So the mind clearly exists. This is what Descartes said too, right? Descartes found it first. He said, I am, therefore I exist. The mind has ideas. That is clear too, because we all have it. And that's it. There's literally nothing else. Minds, spirits, and ideas. His famous Latin saying is esse est praecipi, means to be is to be perceived. That's what it means to be. When I say there is a chair in this room, what does it mean? It means that if I want to sit down, I will feel something nice and hard under my posterior area. And I will feel more comfortable, as I certainly do right now. That's what it means. It does not mean that there is some sort of magical matter in this room. This is a quote of his central thesis. All the chure of heaven and furniture of the earth, in a word, all those bodies which compose the mighty frame of the world have not any subsistence without a mind, that their being is to be perceived or known. That's what it means for something to be, is to be perceived. So that's where this famous, I don't know if you heard it, if the tree falls in the forest, and nobody hears it, did it make a sound? That, I don't know if you guys heard it before, but that's like this famous question. So that comes from Berkeley, and what would be the Berkeley's answer? No, of course not. If nobody perceives it, it did not make a sound. And in fact, there's no tree. Why did he even talk about it? We will see in a few minutes. But that is empiricism. He's saying, I am very strict empiricist. I'm basing everything on my experience. And my experience tells me that I only perceive these ideas in my mind, so there are no real objects. I cannot make them up. Because, I can never go outside my mind and find them there. So why am I making it up? All I know is there are ideas in my head, and that's all there is to it. Clearly, I have some sort of a mind. Clearly, I have ideas in it, and a story, period. He's saying, look, as clear writer as he has met. Locke, of course, is a genius, but he is just went too far. He himself admitted that he doesn't know what are these abstract ideas. He himself admitted that he doesn't know what matter is. So why did he say it exists? We have no justification for that. So if you use this plain historical method, he says, you will see that we can't go that far. We cannot invent matter. And in reality, there's simply no matter. The representative realism is wrong. In that case, according to Locke, all we know are the ideas in our mind, but in the same time, based on that, we're making up some sort of objects. Why? That's unjustified. Even though Locke claimed that some of our ideas are copies of the elements of real world, the primary qualities. Remember, primary qualities are real qualities out there, secondary are not. He's saying, what's the difference between primary and secondary qualities? Can you even imagine a cube which has no color whatsoever, just a shape? What does it even mean? If there's no color, what is the shape? Can you have a shape without any color? Shouldn't it at least have something? So he's saying both of these qualities, primary and secondary, are equally imaginary. They all in our head. There's no primary qualities. Primary is just as imaginary as a secondary. We can never know if our so-called knowledge bears any relationship to what is real. So again, this is remember the Matrix, the movie The Matrix, that kind of related to this idea that if we were not really present in this world, in this room, but instead we're floating in some liquid and some agents attached wires to our head, and we're sending signals which would represent some objects. We would never know a difference. How could we know a difference? That fake world would look very real to us because we would be getting those ideas about tables and other people and I don't know, all sorts of stuff which is happening, but it will only be then happening in our head. There is nothing there. The wires are attached to our brain and sending us these ideas. So he's saying, for all we know, that's what is happening. Except, of course, in the matrix, they actually were present in some sort of liquid, and there was a physical brain to which it's attached. But Locke says we can't even make that up. For all we know, there's just minds which are completely, without any size or shape, or they're nowhere, and those minds perceive the ideas. Okay, so that is very skeptical. Hume will take it even further, but Berkeley doesn't go too far. He's saying to think that there actually are real objects is naive realism. Naive realism can be defined as the belief that properties we perceive objects to have are the properties they really do have. When we presume that the cube really is of this shape, that's naive. Why should it be of this shape? It could be anything. Maybe that's just how we perceive it. Okay. So the primary and secondary qualities are inseparable to him, and therefore both of them either stand or they fall together. You can't say primary qualities are real ones, secondary ones are not. He's saying either both of them are real or they both fake. And he thinks they're both fake because we absolutely have no reason to believe one of them is more real than the other. This is kind of an argument, right? So-called primary and secondary qualities cannot be separated in the mind. You cannot imagine an object which has a shape but no color whatsoever, because they always appear together and are perceived in the same way. If one quality is mind-dependent, the other must also be mind-dependent. We have shown that secondary qualities are mind-dependent. Remember that different people can perceive different colors, different lighting can give you different colors, and so on. So, therefore, primary qualities also are mind-dependent. Locke claims that some of our ideas are copies or pictures, representations. That's why he called it representative realism. Representations of the real objects. To use an example from art, the picture of someone, the copy, allows us to perceive the real person in indirect fashion, right? So imagine you are sitting in a room, dark room, somebody gives you pictures and tells you, well, this is what this looks like, this is what this looks like. Okay, but how can you know the picture really represents the reality? At some point, you actually can compare it, right? You already seen real people. So if somebody gives you a picture of a person, even though you've never seen them, you know this is what people look like. But he says, well, we never went outside our mind, and we never saw the real world as it is, so how can we know that's what the world looks like? We can't. That is an interesting part. So that's part of epistemology, right? What can we know? How can we know it? But now metaphysics. So what's his metaphysics? What is then reality? The common mistake, many people when they hear about idealism, his idealism, they think that he actually thinks, they misunderstand it. They think that he denies the existence of our world. He does not deny the existence of our world. He's saying, by the principles premised, we are not deprived of any one thing in nature. Whatever we see, feel, hear, or otherwise conceive or understand remains as secure as ever and as real as ever. But real in a different sense. It's real in a sense that we have this stable perception of ideas which enter our mind, and we can rely on them. What guarantees this? Well, if you, in your room, if you have a table and you leave your room, you don't see your table. But when you come back, would you expect the table still to be there? Yeah, and it will still be there, of course, as long as you actually come back to that room. But if nobody perceives it, he would say the table doesn't exist. Which seems strange, like what, it exists one moment and doesn't exist the other one? And Berkeley would tell you, yes, that's exactly how it is. In fact, here's an interesting thought experiment. Try to imagine a table in another classroom. Can you imagine a table in the other classroom? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Now try to imagine it as not being perceived by anybody existing without any color, smell, feel, or dimension. Can you do that? No. In fact, if you imagine the table in another room, it's perceived by at least one mind, which is your mind. If no mind perceives it, what does it even mean to say there's a table in another room? Let's say one day all living creatures, not just human beings, but the entire life is wiped out and there's no more people. Would there really be then trees, stones, the planet itself, or not? Well, it could, but only in one sense only. You have to have at least one mind thinking about that. Right? Like your mind right now. You can say, well, let's say in the year 2100, on the 1st of January, the world disappears. Like all, not the entire world, but all the life disappears. Nuclear war, everything dies. Now, what would it mean to say, next day, 2nd of January of 2100, there's still planet with stones and everything? It means that your mind, the way you are today in 2025, imagines that 75 years later, there will be a point in time and you are thinking about what will exist in this point. But if your mind is no longer there to perceive it, what does it even mean to say 2nd of January 2100? That's meaningless sentence. There's no more time. Who would measure this time? Against what? Right? Can you see the point? Okay. So what causes our ideas now? That's $1 million question now, isn't it? Because what can cause them? Well, one idea could cause the other idea. But have you ever seen ideas cause each other? It seems like ideas are completely inert. They can't cause each other. The material substance we already discovered, we already agreed, hopefully, with Berkeley, doesn't exist. So material substance can't cause our ideas either. That's refuted. What else can cause our ideas? The cause of ideas is incorporeal active substance or spirit. That's what Berkeley says. That's the only conclusion according to him. Will, soul, spirit, mind, or self, but it can't be our mind. Why not? Well, if our mind itself could make up these ideas, we could do anything. Like I could immediately imagine $1 million on this table and it would appear. But I can't. Why not? Because I can't cause anything into existence. I can just imagine it, but it would not be the same as having an idea of it actually being there. So who's the only, you may say creature, I guess, I don't know what's the right word, who can cause all these ideas? Who is left? God. Exactly. That's what Berkeley thinks is, I guess there's not much to discuss here, but That's what he says is the cause of all our ideas. And he thinks it's a great way to solve all these problems. First of all, well, there's a nice picture in the book, right? That's the traditional idea how we think that the world was created. God created the world, including the apples and all. And God created us, and we perceive those apples, but we are kind of at the center here, right? Apples do not perceive anything. Stones don't perceive anything. We perceive stuff. So Berkeley says, why would God do this unnecessary work? Why bother creating the physical world so that we could perceive it when God could just feed this directly into our mind? God is all powerful, so God literally is like these agents in the Matrix. He directly gives us the idea of the world. And that's it. There's nothing any other than that. There's God's mind, there's our minds, and their ideas. And that's all there is to it. And to him that solves several problems, including the problem of the role of God. Note that God now is no longer passive. If you follow law, God created the world, wind it up, and not doing anything anymore. What kind of God is that? But here, God actually does everything. Every second of your life, God gives you the idea of the world and kind of completely controls it. And He can do anything because He's not bound by any rules. Yes, it seems like the world follows all these laws, but God could change them. He could do miracles if He wanted to. Perhaps not very often, but He could. And that wouldn't violate anything because this is all ideas God gives you. So God could give you an idea that gravity switched off and the bottles are flying into the sky. Why not? If it's material world, it has to follow orders. But if it's all ideas, it doesn't have to follow orders. God actually could turn it any way He wanted. Science and the laws of nature remain intact. He's saying, I'm not interfering with them. They are there. It's just that what it means is that God, when He gives us these ideas, does it in a kind of a consecutive, rational manner, so that we would not be too confused. Because if God one day told us there is gravity, next day told us there's no gravity, then again gravity, we would be confused. So He's trying to keep it steady. And in that sense, we can learn these laws of nature because that's the way God set up the system. That's the way His ideas flow. There is not one phenomenon, he says, explained on that supposition that matter exists, which may not as well be explained without it. You don't need matter to think about this world. Laws of nature would still be there. Everything would be there. There is causes and effects, but except it's like you can think about it as a sign. There is a sign. When you see something as a cause of another thing, it's a sign that the other thing will happen. So, for example, if you see an apple flying into your head, it's a sign that perhaps you will feel pain when it hits you, right? Something like this. There's no real apple. There's no real head, but it does give you an idea about what next idea will come to you. And next idea will be that of pain. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of these ideas are very modern. He lived 1685 to 1753. So that's what, like 270 years ago. But he had extremely modern ideas. A lot of what we know today, amazingly enough, actually coincides with his philosophy. So he challenged Newton. Newton thought that space was absolute and time was absolute. What does it mean? It basically means that time always goes in one direction with the same speed, right? And space is just this 3 dimensions, which also are always like a huge container, right? The space is like a huge container, and everything happens in this container. That's Newtonian physics. If you start studying physics, that's what they're going to tell you first, because this is the beginning. But is it really how we think today? This is modern physics. No, actually it is not. Berkeley was saying that they are relative, and guess what? They are relative. They are relative, and we know this from the work of Albert Einstein. Space and time, Berkeley, 200 years before Einstein, said that they are relative, and they actually are relative. We have proof of this now. We have proof of the fact that they are relative. So let's take a look at the, he also thought motion is relative. That's all Newtonian physics. So special and general relativity of Newton. Let me explain a little bit about that, because I don't know if you guys do physics. I'm not going to do any formulas, but just the general idea. How did Einstein explain it? What was he talking about? So let's think about it together. So here's the thought experiment Einstein was doing to begin with. He said, okay, imagine you are standing on the ground and holding a flashlight in certain direction, right? What is the speed of light? We actually know it, right? It is around, what is it? Like 400,000 kilometers per second. I'm not sure about miles. I mean, it is 400,000 kilometers per second. The number here doesn't matter as much, but that's the idea. And that is the fastest anything can go in the universe. So the flashlight, the light from the flashlight will be going in this direction with this speed. Okay, let's imagine parallel to this, there is a train going in this direction with the speed of, let's say, 0.1 kilometer per second. That's more realistic for the train, although it's not a round number, but okay. Let's say there's another person standing on this train holding a flashlight in the same direction. What speed would this light be going with? You may be tempted to say 400,000 plus 0.1, right? You may be tempted to say 400,000.1 kilometers per second. That's impossible. This is the fastest anything can go. So it will also go with the speed of 400,000 kilometers per second. How can it be? What happened to this speed? Where did it go? Well, here's what happens. The time slows down. When you're moving, the time slows down. And the faster you're moving, the slower the time. So if this train was going with a speed of 400,000 kilometers per second, guess what would happen to the time for this person who stands on that train? It would stop. It would completely stop. When you're moving with a slower speed, time slows down, but it slows down so little bit that you don't really notice the difference, but it does. It actually does slow down. Not only that, objects shrink. And this is, they proved it experimentally. When objects moves, it is shorter than when it stands down. And the faster it moves, the shorter it is. But not only that, it's relative to the perceiver. So for this person, time will actually not stop. It would stop for this person observing this person, and vice versa. This is physics. So what does that mean? Well, it may be served as an experimental way to prove that Berkeley actually is right. Because otherwise, with the Newtonian physics, it's impossible to explain all of this. What does it mean to say time is relative? It means time for me moves with different speed than the time for you. And time for other people may still be different. When you fly on an airplane from here to Europe, time slows down for you. If you were to fly on a spacecraft, and they later used it in sci-fi fiction, because suppose we are able to create a spacecraft which goes at like half the speed of light, right? And somebody flies to a distant planet. So you are 20 years old, that person who flies to a distant planet is 20 years old. Now 50 years later they come back. So you are 70 years old now. How old they are? Actually, they may be like 25. Because for them, time slowed down. Well, we don't have these kinds of speeds, so we really don't have the direct proof. But there are small proofs of this, because like I said, they actually did measure the way time, the clocks are working at the objects which are going at high speeds and so on. There are these electronic, atomic clocks which take up, and they proved all this. This is fact. The Newtonian general and special relativity, this is special relativity. General relativity refers to the gravity. And that's another interesting thing, basically, that explains what gravity is. Gravity is larger objects attract smaller objects by curving space. So this is how it works. Let's say this is space. Space has 3 dimensions, right? But let's imagine it's 1 dimension. Let's say there is a planet, like the Earth. The planet curves this space. Now you are much smaller than the planet, so when you are approaching the planet, you're falling into this curvature, which is why you're falling in, which is why you are attracted to Earth, which is a much bigger object, and it curved the space, and this space kind of attracts you. This is a general relativity. And again, that's been proved. Objects curve space. So space is not like a huge container. Space can be curved. It's kind of hard to even imagine, but this is physics. Anyway. And the famous mass energy equivalence, that's another interesting thing, which again kind of proves some of the Berkeley's ideas. Energy is equal to mass times mc squared. Mass, what does the C stands for? Well, anyway, but the idea is any object is energy. You can turn energy into objects and objects back into energy. And what is energy? It's not material. And energy is just something which is present. Like if you have energy in the atmosphere, it's not like you have a chunk. So energy can turn into material objects, and material objects can turn back into energy. In that sense, there's no matter really. Because any matter, like if you have a table here, that can turn into pure energy, which is not material. You will not be able to touch it. Okay. Now, of course, this is an interesting system. But does it really explain everything Berkeley wants it to explain? Because some of it is very interesting. But one question we can ask here. He says that God is causing these ideas. The fair question then is, how do we know about God, the idea of God? Right? We don't feel God. We don't touch God. So where did the idea of God comes from? He criticized the matter because he says we never touched matter itself. We only have sense telling us there's matter. So critics told him the same thing about God. They saying, did you ever touch God? So how do you know there's God? He tried to explain it this way. He says, since therefore you have no idea of the mind of God, how can you conceive it possible that things should exist in his mind? these ideas. Or if you can conceive the mind of God without having an idea of it, why may not I be allowed to conceive the existence of matter, notwithstanding the fact that I have no idea of it? Well, he explained it through notion. He said, we don't have idea of God, we have notion. Notion of God. What does that exactly mean? I am directly aware of my own mental operations. I know I am thinking, I know I'm willing, and so on. So I can form a notion of my mind, even though I don't specifically feel my mind, right? But I kind of have an idea that it's there, because this is where all this stuff happening. And I can know my mind without directly experiencing it. So I also can imagine that there are other minds, like you guys and wherever else. And based on that, I can have a notion of this perfect mind, which is like a combination of all these minds. So he thinks that this actually does kind of answer it. Now here's an interesting question, which we'll come back to next time as well. Do I have a notion of my own mind? Do you guys know, do you feel that there is mind of yours there? What does that mean? That goes back to Descartes, remember, because Descartes says, I am there, I think, therefore I exist. Well, is this correct? Do you agree with that? What do you think? Can you criticize that? Let's just look at it, the entire statement. I think, therefore, I exist. That's Descartes' statement, right? What is problematic?
What is problematic?
Yeah, what's problematic?
No, what is problematic?
You don't think anything is
No, not necessarily. I agree. I feel like I would agree with that statement as well as like this statement. I think, therefore I am.
Well, that's basically the same thing, right? I am, say I am, he's saying it in Latin, cogito ergo sum. That means I think, therefore I exist, or I think, therefore I am. But what is, you don't see anything problematic. Nobody sees anything problematic with that. Yeah.
I mean, it's like his perception of it. I guess that's like an argument you could make.
No, but thinking about yourself, your perception of it. Do you see any problem with this statement? Okay, let me explain what is the problem with the statement, which actually has been later pointed out. When you say I, what do you mean? What is I? Hume will later say there's thinking going on for sure, but who's thinking? What justification you have to say I am thinking? Because when you say I, what do you mean? What the hell is this I? What does that mean?
The self.
What is the self? Like, is this tiny human being sitting inside your brain or something? What is it? It doesn't seem like we have justification to say I. At the best, we can say some sort of thinking going on, therefore something exists. But something is not the same as I. When you say I, you presume too much. You actually presume that there is some entity there which, I don't know, called whatever your name is, and which is real, when in fact there may not be. You're presuming too much in this place. Anyway, Hume will say that. We'll talk about it again next time. But that is a good criticism of this. So, another thing with Berkeley's idea. This is another problem people pointed out. There are three possibilities here. One of them is so-called solipsism. Solipsism is the position that the only thing existing is your mind and your thoughts, and nothing else. Now Berkeley disagrees, right? He says there are other minds and there is God. So he does not accept this, but this is one possibility. Okay, so if it's not solipsism, what is it then? Let's say the other option is this, which seems to be what Berkeley is saying, right? There is my mind, there is God, and God gives me the ideas. Now, here's the question. Are these ideas the same as they are for God? Because if not, then he's lying to me. He's deceiving me. He's giving me fake ideas. If for God the idea of a table is, I don't know, this, and for me it's like this, oh, God lied to me. But if they are not different, if actually the God's ideas of everything are exactly the same as my ideas, then what does that mean? It means that I am God. That's pantheism. My mind is part of God's mind. And this is really the only three options. Solipsism, meaning nothing exists except for my mind, or God the liar who's giving me fake ideas, and how do I know what he is telling me about the world is real? Maybe God is lying to me. Or if actually my ideas about the world are the same as God, then I am God. I am part of God's mind. This will be influential, very influential for the future philosophers. But nonetheless, obviously, Berkeley would disagree with that because Berkeley was not pantheist. He was a bishop. He was trying to actually justify the idea of Christian God. But other philosophers pointed out that if he wants to go down this road, he's stuck with these three options. Either there's solipsism and there is no God, he can't accept that, or the God the liar, giving me fake ideas of the world, or God is part of my mind, and my mind is part of God, and therefore I am God.